I'm just sitting here, like in this chair and staring at this computer, and I have my elliptical right behind me. And this is where I've been teaching classes now for like the past 10 weeks. It's bizarre. The like adjustments that we've all had to make so rapidly. I one of the reasons that this is virtual now is I had three talks scheduled for the Stanford Alumni Association for travels that I was going to do. I was um, I was going to Chicago and I think Detroit, and I had a talk scheduled for New York City, all of which got canceled precipitously. I mean, just, 1 week I have all these plans, and just a few days, like within a week or so, I'm sitting here staring at my computer, in my bedroom with my elliptical behind me. And, what's so fascinating about this is something close to this has happened to everybody. Like it's not that common that so many people have such a disruptive experience simultaneously, and at the same time like make certain adaptations to it, both individually and as a culture. It's quite something what we have both changed and accommodated in a rather quick period of time. Um, the talks that I've been giving over the last, I'm going to guess, say 10 weeks to a good number of corporate sites and for a good number of Stanford sites is like, what does this mean? And how do we like maximize our adaptation if that's possible? And what does it mean for us to cope with pretty quick and difficult change? One of the challenges we face, and this is just on a conceptual level, is the medical model that has dominated the information that we get about this virus has both been helpful and not that helpful at the same time for our adaptation and coping. And it's a challenge that we all face. So the medical solution and the medical information, which has been like front and center that we have had to deal with or even chose to deal with, is to keep distance from people, to be, very careful about anybody who has any kind of illness or any kind of, threat to you. But it's created by people who are like experts in epidemiology and viruses, but not necessarily experts in full human coping and adaptation. And so everybody's aware of there's a misconnect in that these are people who are absolutely first-rate thinkers about one part of this experience we're going through, which is how to make sure that we're physically safe, that we don't get sick, that we don't infect other people, that we don't hurt people. And that's essential. But it's limited in terms of the full human experience and limited in terms of full human thriving. And there's a cultural and a personal cost that we're all paying. And it's not just from the virus. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is like such a really simple template of what it is that people might want in different circumstances, you see that survival is it's the most basic bottom line need that people have. but it's not the need or the element of it going up to the top that leads to full human life. It's necessary but not sufficient. And we've been getting really excellent, thoughtful advice on the lowest stratum of what it is that human life is about. It's much more than just surviving, even though we have to survive to do all those greater things. But when we're told almost relentlessly about how much threat there is, and to keep distance from people, and at some level, not to trust them and to be frightened of them, even though some of the warnings turned out not to have been as accurate as may have hoped. There's now some sense that being outside may not be as much of a risk, or that touching things may not be as much of a risk. But it was a full hearted response to physical safety. And physical safety is incredibly important, but it's unfortunately not how people experience safety. Nobody feels safe just because they're locked inside of walls that may be impenetrable, or they're barricaded against a virus or the spread of a virus. That's not what it is that is safety. Those are great preparations for safety. But safety is a more inner experience. Like we need to feel safe. And some of it is based on physical safety from outside, and some of it is based on our inner ability to cultivate safety, or to cultivate some equanimity in us, regardless of what our circumstances are. And even more challenging than that is our safety also to large part depends on relationship. That locked up alone or somewhat isolated, it's very hard to feel safe, even if like there's no virus that's going to get you. Safety is some combination of protection from outside threat and some inner cultivation of appreciation of one's life, a deep connection with nature or the people, an ability to self-regulate, and a certain kind of optimism. And those are inner qualities. It's interesting because I've thought a number of times that it would have been so much easier for us all if the advice we had gotten had been more multidimensional. Like, and this may sound like utterly like Pollyanna and kumbaya, but if we had been taught that when you're 6 feet behind somebody, think good thoughts about them, wish them well, recognize that they're in the same position you're in, empathize with the fact that they're standing 6 feet in front of you on the same line, hoping to get into Whole Foods so you could have a scrum to get whatever toilet paper is left over. But we weren't taught that. And we were given almost no instruction in the higher parts of Maslow's hierarchy. We've been left alone in that. And I'm not sure that that's been good for us. I'm not sure that this neglect of inner safety and this minimization of inner safety has been in all of our best interests. A more comprehensive response, I think, would have spared some people some strain. So you think about this, like, what does it mean in difficult times to cultivate some degree of sanity and safety? Well, the first thing is to recognize the shared nature of this as best we can. The threat parts of our nervous system, like the scared, anxious, even our default network, which has us when we're doing nothing else, simply thinking of all the things that can go wrong in our lives. That's what happens when we sit by ourselves for a few minutes. We cultivate awareness of what are the things that are a threat to us, and all of those kind of conceptions are that we're alone, that it's us against a difficult, hostile, indifferent universe. And that is actually both a creator and a byproduct of stress chemicals. The initial stress chemicals of epinephrine and norepinephrine, they're in part designed to make us feel alone, to focus our attention on a threat, to have us be um, like it's just us in this need for survival of the separate self. We don't do well when that's our messaging day after day, day after day, hour after hour, week after week. That distorts our view. You know, that makes us feel extra alienated and extra um, alone. One of the things that some of the people that I'm working with or talking with about this, they have an understanding which I have had conceptually, but maybe not as strongly as this, that the thing that appears to be the real killer from this virus is the immune cytokine response, like the exaggerated and the overproduction and then the overreaction of this protein response in our nervous system, the cytokine storm, and that people who are particularly vulnerable will succumb to that. Well, some of that is that, the role of inflammation in so many of our disease processes makes it so much harder to respond to cytokine storm when it comes from a new stimulus. But what we don't recognize is that fear creates a modest cytokine reaction. That fear and alienation and anxiety, they create inflammation inside of us. They are ways of arousing us to threat. And so it's interesting when you want to think of, like, what is the way that we go through this. We need to recognize the capacity, some capacity that we have to regulate some of our, not just inner sense, but how we relate to the outer sense. I have a friend of mine that I was walking with, and I think he told me that he was in a Costco, and that this was probably a month ago at the height of everybody was rattled as can be, legitimately so. But I remember he told me that he was in Costco and he had to cough. And so, he made this exaggerated thing of going into his elbow so that nobody would feel frightened by him. But he was kidding to me and saying, Fred, the minute I coughed, like everybody within 100 feet who was 50 and above, like dived for cover. One cough having nothing to do at all with COVID, he had an allergic reaction. Now, I'm not minimizing our need to stay safe. But I also remember hearing that or reading that at that time, people were trying to get into Costco. Normally, normally Costco would allow you in once a day, to do your shopping. And at that point, they were limiting it to like one big thing a day, because there was some concern with the food supply and with people being too close. So there were people, it was so funny, there were people who would try to put on disguises so they could go to Costco more than once a day. And I think to myself, well, that's what can happen with so much fear and mistrust of other people. And you'd want to create some sense without minimizing our own need to protect ourselves of some psycho, spiritual, emotional reactions where we're trained to be pro-social, when we're trained to have a little more like us, or that is informed to us that that's really important, not just for the community, but your own health, like your own ability to handle this situation. So let me, what I have about another 20 or so minutes before I stop. Let me do a couple of very simple, like meditation practices, just to stimulate like this very simple thinking. So what I hope you would do is be willing to do like a 3-minute visualization practice where even those where if you, even those of you out there, would you please remove your cell phones so that you're not multitasking, which makes you more stressed, and just allow yourself to sit still and comfortably. Like there is something about the human nervous system that needs to know it can be safe. And our fear and our cultures and our training remind us too often that it's just from outside. So we want to remind ourselves also that it's from inside. Very simple. But if you would just bring your attention inward a little bit and just allow yourself to relax just a bit. And allow yourself, if you are relaxed or can relax, the muscles in your abdomen will relax a little bit, and your breathing will just naturally slow down just a tiny bit. And you want to allow that to occur. You want to allow your breathing to slow. And you want to even, like, I guess, deliberately see if you can relax enough so that when you inhale, your belly expands a little, which just allows some signals to get transmitted in your nervous system that you're safe now. That when your belly relaxes and your breathing slows, and specifically when you unclench some of the muscles in your abdomen, it makes it a little easier for your nervous system to recognize that you're safe. And then just for a moment, like the simplest practice that I teach everywhere is just allow your mind to picture someone you care for. Nothing here is anything but simple. Just allow your mind to picture someone you care for deeply. And bring attention to that image and just see if you can feel, like in your body, the experience of that, of affection. And then just let that go and take a very simple breath and gently allow your eyes to open. There's nothing new that I'm describing in any way. That we're human beings, like wired for threat and wired to protect ourselves and those we love from problems. And so that's where much of our attention goes until somewhere in us we either feel safe enough or we grow past the need for omnipresent alertness. And then our attention goes to other more generative pro-social things. And in Maslow's needs, once we have like the most basic necessities, we'll cultivate relationship. But the true genius of what Maslow came up with, which is rarely taught in schools and in culture because it's of a more transcendent nature than our culture tends to be comfortable with, is that Maslow recognized that there were deficit needs and meta needs. That the deficit needs are for relationship. I'm alone, I'm scared, I need somebody else to help me. And that's an absolutely legitimate need. But what Maslow also recognized is that human beings have meta needs or giving or higher order needs, such as, well, who else is suffering and how can I help them? Or what can I do? What can I do that might be of use? And these are the parts of us that struggle in any circumstance of danger and threat. That we orient inside in a protective way, which the outside will never satisfy. And we forget I'm going to say, the meta parts of our need system. So Maslow talks about relationship needs, then esteem needs, just then like almost beauty needs, and just living our own life to its fullest needs. But some of this can be like cultivated in times like this. So the next just simplest practice that I would ask those of you sitting out there to do, and this is one of those maybe more meta expressions of interpersonal needs is just to stop for a minute. Um, just just stop and take a breath and just sit still for a moment. And then just ask yourself, and this is just a simple practice, like in the last 2 or 3 days, like who has been kind to me? And you just want to ask, just by looking at like your last couple of days, like who's been kind? And that can be as simple as somebody, like, you know made you dinner, which may not be simple, or somebody listened to you, or you misbehaved and somebody was forgiving towards you. But you want to look at, just at your last 48 hours or so, and just look, if you can, through the eyes of who out there was like good to you. I mean, it doesn't have to be universally good. And then you just want to pick one of those experiences and just, in your mind and heart, just see if you can say thank you. Just respond from inside of you, like just thank you. And then just let that go. I think one of the real challenges, not multiple, but let's just say one, that almost all human beings face is, I believe we're designed to not see things clearly, but to see things from the point of view of threat. That I'm not sure that our perceptions, at least the most basic of them, are designed to let us see the world clearly. And they're designed to probably ensure our survival and maybe ensure the survival of whatever group we identify with. But I don't believe that they're meant to give us an honest appraisal at some level of how our life is. And I remember recently reading some hypothesis from somebody who had done a whole host of like neuroimaging studies of people who were being taught to experience compassion. And what these people were hypothesizing was that it's only when we touch compassion that we start to see things clearly. That until then, we're out of balance, and compassion brings us to stasis, or at least a different kind of stasis. But it involves not quite as much threat, and either offering compassion to ourselves or compassion to others. But it blunts some of the fear and the threat that we all take as so normal. You know, that maybe we have a compassionate response more inherently to why people do what they do rather than wanting to punish them all the time. Or maybe we have a little more compassionate response to ourselves, to our own suffering, rather than again just wanting to punish or hurt. But that research struck me very strongly because it was highly reminiscent of when I did a lot of forgiveness teaching. Because it was only when people either started to forgive or had already forgiven or had cultivated some compassion for either their suffering or the suffering of the people maybe that had hurt them. It was at those moments that I saw what felt like more honest speaking. Like not just this is terrible and they're bad, but much more nuance in the communication of what was being said, like much more balance in the description. And they were able to handle so many more streams of information and give so many more thoughtful ways of even thinking about their own lives. You know, and again, there are conceptions on some people who like study even the language, some of the language production of human beings that suggests that our language centers and the way we construct the stories around our experiences are not designed to give a truthful appraisal of what happened, but to serve also in some large part around threat and protection. That they have shown in experiments when people are given ambiguous stimuli and told to take one side or another of ambiguous stimuli and to tell a story around it, even when there's no certainty about what happened, like a picture that has an ambiguous result. But the experimenter will say, okay, take the side of this person and describe this, or take the side of the other person. People create very self-righteous and harsh narratives around the other side in a situation where there's nothing there that prejudged it. And so one of the things that I have been both professionally working on and thinking about is really the human need to practice affirmatively, like positive, I'm going to say mental training, like as a both as a response and a prophylactic thing to our well-being, not just as a response to threat, but as a protection to give us a more nuanced statement. So let me do one more brief meditation practice and then finish up with a few thoughts, and then I'll take questions until the time is gone. So if everybody again would please just close your eyes for a few moments. And again, it's a reminder to just bring your attention inward or inside. And to literally allow your attention to be towards our center, just the center of our body. And just practice, if you can, for a few moments, being safe inside yourself, with somewhat quieter breathing, just a little bit gentler rhythm. And then just see if again, the most simple, like self-acceptance, just try to remind yourself in very simple language that you're okay. Like it's a very simple, these are the most like easily practiced things. Just I'm okay. I'm okay as I am now, at least. Like I'm okay, even though, next week it might be a nice idea to lose 10 pounds. Right now, I'm okay. I'm okay if my house isn't clean, but right now I'm okay. I'm okay if my dog isn't perfect. At least now they're okay. I'm just using the simplest reminders that we can cultivate, even if it's just for brief moments, and a certain kind of acceptance. And then just let that go and take a breath. One of the things that I found, like, again, teaching forgiveness for so long and to so many people in so many hurtful situations, was how, like, chronically practiced anger or chronically practiced victimhood or chronically practiced anxiety, they distorted um, they distorted reality. And so much of our work was in getting people to unclench those habits so they could see a more nuanced view of their own lives. So one of the simplest practices was, and the simplest practice was, when people would like complain too much about what had hurt them, we weren't in any position to tell them no, it wasn't so bad, or it was okay that they did what they did. But we were in a position to ask them to change their story so that it would more reliably reflect reality. So we might say, have them say something like, well, I woke up today in a bed, and I had running water and food in the refrigerator and a couple people who cared for me and maybe a job, and this bad thing happened. And unfortunately, until we can learn some of those qualities, we're going to distort reality for our threat-based programming, which is incredibly helpful short-term and even essential. And we may have to change things because of this pandemic. But that threat-based program limits too much of information coming in. And so it becomes much harder to plan like full, like humanity-based responses, whether it's as a community or as individuals. And so that is one of the real teachings that I learned and remembered, is like we can always add a little bit of reminder to our like negative practiced ways of experience of things, to just to take some of them, not to minimize them, but to give our nervous system and brain a better chance of talking to us in a way that might be helpful to us. That would be the bottom line of this. Like, inner safety usually means that you make a decent outward appraisal of the threat, but you still retain enough control over your nervous system and your experiencing, that you retain some faith and appreciation of your resilience or coping, and that you remember that you can go inside for some safety as well. Anyway, it's 3:50. Um, that's that's probably enough for me for one-dimensional talking, um, you know, at a computer screen. I see some of these questions. I'm going to take one of them, the one that's staring me in the face. It says, and I like this, I am struggling more this week because when things were shut down, it felt shared. Now something I belong to is opening up for dining, but a lot of us are afraid to go back. So we are fragmenting into camps. Those who think we must reopen and those who fear it. What to do? You know, I'm going to say that shows a healthy community, because how could we know for sure um, what the right response is? And so there's going to be responses all across the continuum. Some people are going to say it's too early, and some people are going to say it's too late. And that's the world of duality and multiple perspectives. And uh, that's so crucial to I'm going to say a well-functioning culture that's not a monoculture. So we have to decide, if we're given a choice, where we fall on that. We may decide that it's too early for us to go back, so we don't go back. We may decide that we want to jump back in. Though there's there's no there's no like rock solid evidence about either. And so that's the process that human beings experience with almost anything. There's going to be multiple points of view. Anyway, is it too much to ask to know just how to survive this disruption, but how to make this shared catastrophe and something that changes all for the good? Um, that's a tough question, because it gets into some degree like an evolutionary thing, like how do we as human beings grow? And that's a tough one. I think one thing that we can do, I mean, and this is hard, is to make it less likely that we will respond in harsh ways, so that we contribute less to whatever lack of sharedness this is. And then again, like everything else, we have to choose where we put our energy to improve things. If you go to anything on the web and look for areas of need, they're endless, endless. I mean, opportunities to serve, opportunities to contribute, hundreds of pages. So each of us has to take what our predilections are and our talents are, and we have to try to put them to work, literally, in a world that needs everything. So I'm not sure that there's going to be one epiphany that's going to shift everything, but there will be people working in their spheres of influence and in their talents to, if more people did that, the world would improve. Okay, so how does this work for people who are objectively not okay? That's a very different question. And I've given enough of these talks to recognize that requires an and, not a but. That in particular, if your external is not okay, you better damn well take care of your internal. But the answer to that also is, it requires all of us to, in particular, like, exercise whatever muscle we have politically to make sure that resources are better shared, and that we all contribute to well-being, and not to expect it to be somebody else's responsibility. So if we want to know how it is that we help those without jobs, one of the things we all do is ask ourselves that question. If this were important to me, what would I do? What specific actions would I take? Who specifically would I help? What would I do in my community to share resources, to improve distribution resources, to make sure that maybe I don't have 500 times more? I don't know. But it's not a question that's out there. It's a question that's also in here. And many of you would have read um, the the New York Times pieces of years ago, that, not maybe just a couple of years ago, that is, like, financial inequality and resources inequality hits communities and countries, the happiness of all goes down. that as resources are distributed worse, in the not just the people with less become less happy, but the people with more become less happy. And so, in some levels, the question is being asked for all of us. If we want to preserve this culture of ours, um, we have to do stuff. So if those who feel it is okay to go back to closer physical proximity, and then the behavior affects many others, how is that not harming the other community? I don't think that's a decision that's left up to us. I think every aspect of the public health world has made it very clear that we're supposed to keep physical distancing. The question is whether you can open a restaurant or not whether you sit on top of people in that restaurant. I'm just, I don't think there's any real discussion at this point, um, that it's okay to mingle. What is the question is, do we go back to the malls? Do we go back to work? Do we go back to eating together? Do we sit in a park? But it's not that we do so on top of each other. I don't think that was in the mix. Um, you have stressed fear. I think fear is, I don't know if there's any difference. Anxiety is, our felt sense of concern that our future will not be um, what we want it to be. And when we feel the physical response um, of stress, we interpret that as anxiety. And unfortunately, anxiety is hardwired into our system to make us want to do almost anything to get away from it. Um, and how would you help the people of Minneapolis? It's funny. I don't know, but I think the people of any city, for any community, would be like, I'm going to say, even though I'm not necessarily a religious teacher, very nice idea to treat others as you yourself would like to be treated. I think that would be good advice for anybody. And that advice would probably go a long way. Um, the last question is, Maslow's hierarchy has been fairly well discredited. I don't think that's what the research shows. I think it's been shown that it may not be in order as people may, first formulate it, and may not be as discrete. But from what I understand, the biggest challenge to Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that even people with few resources want to have valued lives and want to help others. And that's probably the biggest challenge. I thank you all for your time and attention.